How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law, Thomas McCoy, and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Really nice. I saw you getting ready. I saw you take that deep breath. I saw your diaphragm. Mark, every week it's just more and more phenomenal.
Practice.
It is.
Repetition, right? 10,000 times. On the 10,000th time, I'm going to nail it. I promise, Dr. Joe.
Well, good. I look forward to that, although I think, not sure how many more nails we can put into this, because it's pretty dang good. But, I must admit, I still sometimes wonder about, is it real or not? It's like, that's part of what I wonder about myself, because, I am, imposter begins with I am. But
yes.
With that in mind, Tom, I wonder if you could introduce our guest for tonight.
Absolutely, Dr. Joe. Tonight, we have Barret Michaelec. Barret Michaelec is the director of the Center for Advancing Interprofessional Practice, Education, and Research, or CAIPER, and an associate professor in the Edson College of Nursing and Health Innovation. A sociologist by training, Michaelec's research examines socialization and professionalization processes and mechanisms nested within health professions, education, and practice, most notably those impacting socio-emotional and team-based skills and attributes. His work also explores disparities in healthcare, and within the health professions, with a focus on how structural designs of pre-professional pathways may perpetuate the lack of diversity of the healthcare workforce. Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Barret.
No problem.
It's so good. Barret, can you just do me a favor real quick? Can you just translate your bio, please?
Right? I know. As he's reading it, I'm like, well, this is all a clouded mess.
Right. So tell us about this.
So my research, a majority of my work is looking at kind of the ingredients of what makes good team members. Huh. So it's specifically in the healthcare fields and health professions education. So how can we cultivate good team members for healthcare delivery and patient-centered care? And as a sociologist, I bring a little bit different flair to it compared to majority of the people involved in what we call interprofessional education, which I'm sure you've heard about, are mostly on the clinical side. And so I come with it in terms of bringing more psychosocial theories and concepts, so theories and concepts from sociology, psychology, even anthropology, into the mix and say, have we thought about this? Or how could we use this theory to help kind of better our understanding of this element of teamwork? And so that's what I do. That's kind of the main aspect. And that's what my center does. We take that science and then translate that science into e-learning courses to help train and educate health professionals and health profession students. The flip side, not flip side, but the other side of my research is really examining the pathways to medical school, through nursing school, PA, PT, and say, okay, why aren't we seeing broader diversification of the healthcare workforce, even though we're calling for it? So the phrase I always use is the system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So if we don't really review the system of how this works, then we're just going to keep on getting the same outcomes and output. So I go back and look through it from an organizational perspective and say, okay, what are we doing here and there where we could be opening the doors a little bit wider? What are the things we're not looking at? One of the best sayings from a sociologist is sociologists make the familiar strange. And so that's what we do. That's one of my favorite things, right? And so we kind of bring all of these things up to the surface and say, hey, take a look at this. This is what happened. You might have gotten used to this and take it for granted, but it could be impacting in very dynamic ways.
Yeah.
But Barret, that's how we've always done it. We've always done it that way, Barret.
Right, exactly. And so that's why it's working so well, right? That's why we're having the outcomes that we want so well. That's why we're having, in terms of our health outcomes, in terms of our diversification outcomes, So we just, it takes sometimes a different lens.
And if we are trying to adjust the pathway,
Yeah.
do we first adjust the test? Because I'm a physician. I had to take ridiculous tests.
Yeah,
but they were only measuring a certain, very narrow area. So we changed.
That's just and one of the interesting things about that test is the cost of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And not just, and then, so that you get the initial cost. And then if you want to take it another time, there's an additional cost. Or if you want to reschedule it, there's additional cost, plus all the prep work that goes into it that requires additional financial resources, plus all the other types of prerequisites in terms of shadowing hours, volunteer hours, all of the things that may take kind of what we'll call social and cultural capital. Knowing people in the mix that might be able to make connections for you to get those shadowing opportunities, or the cultural capital of really understanding how the game is played in terms of what extracurriculars are going to look the best on your application for this particular school, and how do you get those, right? So there's a number of things. The MCAT's a great one, but there's a number of other ways that are barriers for particular types of students who may not come with the kind of privilege that other students come in with. And so I've gone around trying, giving this talk a number of times, trying to help admissions committees open their eyes a little bit more to looking at a broader range of students by looking at what they're requiring and saying, okay, are these serving as barriers to some extent?
Yeah. So I'm curious, given what we're talking about tonight, examining imposter phenomenon through the lens of humility, spotlighting conceptual disconnections.
Yeah.
Did you think there's a correlation with what you just said? That it's like the game is rigged a little bit for people to get to medical school. I mean, I'll admit it.
Yeah.
Does that contribute, do you think, to the prevalence of imposter phenomenon within those medical students?
So you have, with imposter phenomena, you have kind of this situational, contextual inaccuracy in your abilities and your own self-concept, kind of believing in this kind of fraudulence, this intellectual fraudulence. And so that can definitely happen when you are presented with a place that does not feel familiar and where there's a number of other high achievers. I mean, one of the most interesting things about medical school, I remember when I first did my dissertation way back in the day, and I was talking to a number of medical students, one of the most interesting things I heard was, I was such a rock star at college, and I come here and they're all rock stars. And so you come in there and you see that everyone is doing amazing things and challenging things. And for some, that can raise up these feelings of feeling like an imposter. Yeah.
Because you're maybe not as cool as you thought you were because you're cool people?
Well, or there's underlying, kind of maybe conditions, underlying anxieties, underlying depressions that may have already been existing that this then brings to the surface, or there's just a lack of confidence in one's ability. And whether it's so the two key things about imposter phenomena is the lack of confidence and the lack of authentic self-concept. So lack of accuracy in self-concept. And so those things can be triggered by a number of elements of medical school or any other type of kind of high achieving arena, which the studies have all shown, right? So we find people coming into these arenas and then this happening to some extent because whether it's a new school or a new job or a new position. To some extent, it then triggers these feelings of inaccuracy or feelings of inadequacy and lack of confidence in this kind of this sense of fraudulence amongst others. Like, I'm going to be found out at any moment. They're going to find me out that I don't belong at this particular place. Yeah. And those feelings then can lend to a lack of productivity, a lack of taking on additional challenges. And even can have been found in research to actually perpetuate or exacerbate elements of depression and anxiety. And so working through those can be remarkably challenging. And they take an extensive amount of time to kind of feel. One of the key elements, and just stop me when I go off, because I'll go off on tangents all day. One of the interesting things that needs to be studied more, and it's just like it's just starting coming to the surface, but it hasn't yet really been connected with imposter phenomena, is the notion of belongingness. and enhancing one's or a group's sense of belongingness to an organization or social structure in which they feel as though they're a part of that. They're a valued and necessary part, that they have a voice, that they feel they can be authentic, that they feel heard. You can imagine, just by me saying these things, that can then have a positive impact on that self-confidence and that accuracy of self.
Absolutely. And it is that sense of belonging that is replenished every time we hear from our sponsors.
I love
With
it.
that in mind, we will take a commercial break. Belong. We'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
Hey folks, thank you for listening to the Dr. Joe Show. We've been investigating whether or not we want to bring sponsors into our podcast. What are your thoughts? Do you know somebody who might be a good partner with the Dr. Joe Show, who may want to align their product or service with the Dr. Joe Show? Think about it.
And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show, talking about imposter phenomenon, what I always referred to as imposter syndrome, with Professor Barret Michaelec. And we were talking about belongingness as it relates to imposter phenomenon. Is there an element of, how do I say this? I don't belong in this community and I belong in the next curve, yet maybe I don't. So I can't get to that next curve either. I need to be held back with the community.
So personally, I'm not fully aware of research that specifically talks to that. What I do know about belonging, just in a couple of workshops that I've led and some work that we've done within the college itself, has really been this notion of a fit of values, personal values, tying to the organization's values. So as well as kind of that feeling of connectedness with relationships in that organization. So to your point, to your question, if folks don't feel, if an individual feels as though, hey, I'm not connecting, I don't have a lot of great relationships, they don't have to be the best things in the world, but people you can at least connect with in this organization on a consistent basis. And then also, hey, my values aren't aligned with this organizational values. Now, the tricky part of that part is what, kind of what is said are the values that are written on like the kind of mission statements and things like that, and then what's actually practiced. So that's a tricky part of belongingness that we need to kind of tease out in more kind of qualitative ethnographic type of research. But again, getting back to your question, that's where I can see people feeling like I don't necessarily belong in this particular cohort or this particular wave, and I need to find a new opportunity. I mean, you're seeing that a ton with where folks were leaving after COVID, their jobs or changing jobs. I think that the rose-colored glasses were off, and folks saw like, hey, actually, businesses care about bottom lines. I may not be a necessity. I may be a cog in a wheel here and not really an individual. So I need to find a place where I can feel as though I fit.
But the sign said we're a family here.
The sign said we're a family, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious. So I can understand if you don't feel like you fit into a group and you want to be part of another group where you feel valued. But what about the imposter phenomenon? What about when you want to be part of that group,
right,
but you don't think you deserve to be part of that group?
I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy.
Not really, yeah, exactly. And so it may not be a sense of not feeling worthy so much as I'm not good enough. Yeah. And it's worthy. I use worthy in a different way. You're definitely, I think people might feel worthy of being a part of the organization, but they may not feel as though they're smart enough or have achieved enough to be considered in the same breath of how we're talking about, others in the same organization. And so this notion of being found out, like someone's going to read this paper or someone's going to see this score and they're going to realize, who are you? How did we pick this? And so folks will, start to make up those scenarios where it was because of their charm, or because someone made a mistake, or because they know so-and-so. And so
got lucky.
Yeah, it got lucky is another great one. It just kind of happened, kind of fell in my lap. And so those are the games that we'll play with ourselves when we don't feel like we fit because of our abilities or our talents aren't, don't fit there. Or we think that, again, it's not true. And that's the kicker, is that it's a game that we've kind of created for ourselves, which is really interesting.
And so what's the antidote?
So I think one of the antidotes for imposter phenomena, it's not going to be like constant accolades. That's just not going to, that's going to fuel a fire. Again, I think it's cultivating a culture of acknowledgement within an organization where it's not a constant, like, you're doing great, but letting people know, hey, I saw what you did there. I saw whether it's a small little bit of work or a great big job. You're acknowledging individuals on a consistent basis from leadership. So leadership is saying, I see this and it's good. And this is how you're feeding into the broader culture. I think it's also cultivating a culture of belonging in terms of understanding how individuals, talking about how individuals' work fits within an organization. But also it's having relationships in which people are able to connect, not feel isolated or alone, to make those connections and have that kind of emotional good stuff come through them. And kind of move along in time. This is where the research needs to go with imposter phenomena, is that we need to see longitudinal. When does it fade? Does it take a year? Does it take two? Does it depend on the context?
How old when it starts? I mean,
exactly. Developmentally, we don't see we don't hear about imposter phenomena. Now, again, I'm not familiar with this type of research, but in the research that I've done, I wasn't really familiar with the developmental aspect of imposter phenomena. We tend to see it. Most of the research has been done on adults entering the workforce or entering medical school or other type of high productivity type of schools, high achievement type of elements. So it would be interesting to look at it at a developmental stage, if it hasn't already.
Doesn't that relate back to the social domain, Dr. Joe? I mean, if we're saying like, okay, there's no biological point in time where it kicks in, it has to be the social domain that says, no, stop, slow your roll. And then you start to let that come into your mind, and then you accept that as reality.
Yeah. I absolutely think it has to do with the social domain in that context. It could also start with the home domain if you're in a family that
social home,
that isn't really supportive of you, and
right,
says no. How many families we have who say, you're never going to make it. You're just not going to make it, and then you wind up being brilliant, going to law school or medical school or whatever school, and you start doubting.
College boy.
When I started medical school, the very first day, there we are, 150 or so of us, first day of medical school, and the director puts an equation on the board. P equals MD. All you need to do is pass. And I don't think anyone believed it.
Yeah.
I think anyone believed it,
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're starting to look at in the research is kind of thinking about that social domain, is also looking at kind of social characteristics and social statuses related to kind of race and ethnicity, SES, gender. These types of things are important to look at when we're saying who's experiencing imposter phenomena most likely, or in what situations. And then you look at the typical kind of, organization, and you might see that it's predominantly white, predominantly male. And then you can start to see why there might be feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt when you're entering, an organization or a group where you're the only one. And so that social context will feel overwhelming to some extent and be like, why am I the only? This must have just happened because of A, B, or C, right? And so that's, again, another area where the research needs to go. It has been, and that's the majority of the research and the samples have been with women and people from minoritized backgrounds. And so we're starting to see now kind of tease that out and look at it a little bit deeper. But yeah, to get to that social context, that's where it needs to go.
And then in the article, you talk about the tactical component, the strategic imposterism. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So this is I mean, all of it's fun to talk about, but the strategic imposterism was a concept that was a little bit buried in the literature. Hadn't had a lot of voice yet, hadn't had a lot of amplification, but it was in there, and I thought it was intriguing. And my co-authors really thought it was intriguing in terms of how it's utilized, why it's utilized. And then when you think about it, you definitely have seen it in action. So it's the idea of
What is it?
Yeah. So it's the idea of kind of belittling yourself and your achievements on purpose, not really having a low self-confidence or an inadequate view of your achievements. So the accuracy is there, the confidence is there, but what you're doing is you're playing the game and you're saying, I'm not going to do so. You're telling people, I'm not going to do so well here. I'm not very good. I'm not very smart in this, or this isn't my cup of tea. And what you do in the process is you set the expectations low for your peers and maybe your advisors and your leaders. And so when you hit those markers, they're like, see, you're doing great. You're fantastic. So you're automatically setting, like, it's almost like a long con. You're setting yourself up to be perceived as someone who might have imposter phenomena or who might have a low self-concept or low self-confidence. But in reality, you're utilizing it strategically in a way to actually, beef yourself up in the long run and almost give you a boost to others. It's a really, the moment I started writing about it, I was like, I've seen this a ton.
Yeah, really interesting.
And that's nothing to take away from, I don't want to take away from imposter phenomenon. All that's a real thing that actually happens. Yeah. This is just a, kind of an element of it, if you will.
I would imagine there's a fail-safe mode there too, to say, well, maybe I can't get all the way there. So if I lower that bar down there, then if I fail, it's not that bad. It wasn't my fault because I wasn't supposed to be there anyhow.
To some extent, you could utilize it. I mean, there's kind of coping mechanisms that we utilize to kind of do that to ourselves in terms of, I'm going to almost detriment myself so that if I don't achieve, I have an excuse, right? This is a little bit different where you're not cutting your legs off from under yourself. You're just setting others' expectations down through this kind of imposter pathway. When in reality, you're pretty sure you're going to rock it, but you want to make sure that you keep expectations lower so that you even get a higher boost.
Got it.
Yeah.
And if you don't rock it, well,
then what have you lost?
Right.
What have you lost? Yeah.
But that's not the expectation, right? You expect to rock it.
Well, with the strategic imposterism, you still have confidence and you still have an accurate view of your abilities. So whether or not your belief in yourself is still there, we'll put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can see this confidence, and I can see the idea of pretending that you're not as good as you really are. But what I'm really grateful for is our sponsors really are as good as they really are.
I love it.
With that in mind, I want to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
Hey, folks, welcome back. So any thoughts? Do you listen to other podcasts? Do you see how they do the sponsors? Is there a way that they're utilizing sponsors that you enjoy or you don't enjoy? I listen to SmartList, and I really enjoy how the co-hosts share the voiceover for the product or service. It's really funny for the most part, but it's unique. It's them really endorsing. Does that work? What do you think?
And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show with Professor Barret Michaelec, discovering something that Dr. Joe and I have been talking about for a very long time, imposter syndrome and the internal critic. Why aren't we doing the best that we can? What is it? Is it the social domain? Is it the biological domain? Is it the home domain? Or is it the IC domain, Dr. Joe?
Yeah, the way I see myself, the way I think other people see me. And in the article, you talk about human beings being wired against having an accurate awareness of ourselves and others. I got to know more about that. How does that connect with imposter phenomenon?
So we are riddled with cognitive biases. And kind of a cognitive psychologist could speak much better to this than I can. But in terms of how it relates to imposter phenomena or even humility, Our biases for ourselves are to protect our self-image. So we are usually using downward comparisons for ourselves. So, and what I mean by that is we're using others who may not be as high achieving or may not have as much, or kind of resource-wise may not be where we're at, as our comparisons, so that we can protect. Oh, look at me, here I am. You know, I'm actually doing pretty well. We're gonna have a biased self-concept in terms of we actually load our confidence pretty high. There's a number of studies that show that, like, I think it's even just US Americans think awfully high of themselves compared to other countries.
No.
Yeah, but I think honestly, I think it's just a natural biases that most people have. We really have a high self-view. And again, that's for protective factors, to go into social interactions and to engage with other people. If you think about it, if we held like kind of a lower self-image of ourselves and we went to go talk to someone we didn't know, or went for a job interview, I mean, it would be hard to have those interactions, be hard to make them work. So what's also interesting is we're kind of biased against our biases. We don't even know, and we're protected from that as well. So with imposter phenomena, you'd think that these protective cognitive, these psychological resources that we have would come into play and allow us to see ourselves for our authentic, abilities, and really understand and kind of provide that confidence that we need to say, actually, no, I do belong here, and I am just as good as everyone here. And what's really interesting is that what they find with some of the studies on imposter phenomena, although they can negatively impact work and productivity and going for next steps, that some people still do quite well. Like where they'll rate high on imposter phenomena, but they're actually doing very well. So even this constant a presentation of, hey, you're doing great in terms of their achievements, it's not registering. It's not coming across for some people. So we need to start understanding kind of how we can break down those barriers. And we went over a few of those before. But in terms of humility, which we can talk about a little bit later, those biases also come into play in terms of not really encouraging us to be our most humble selves.
Before we get into humility, which I totally want to get into the humility piece of it, is there a fueling of imposter syndrome, kind of like the fear of failure, that works for people also, where it's like, it keeps me going because I don't want to be found out?
So there's been some scholars in the medical field, as well as other fields, that have talked about that having that little element of imposter phenomena being a little bit of a positive in terms of that fuel, and being like, hey, you know what? That keeps your competitive edge right there. So maybe we shouldn't be so scared of it. And in turn, and it's in the same kind of sentence, they'll say, maybe a good side effect of this is humility. Maybe you'll be taking some bites of humble pie and realizing that there are others that are just as good, if not better, than you in certain things. So there are people who make that argument. What I would say to that is, sure, let's keep that right there. Let's put that over there. But let's also see, hey, wait, what types of people, what's going on, what types of situations, what kind of context is imposter phenomena most likely? Because it can be detrimental psychologically in terms of mental health. So how do we maybe keep the good stuff, this understanding of humility, but then also make sure that people aren't suffering and minimizing their abilities, in that way. We want to maximize potential.
There we go. IMAX. I am. Mark, because I know that this has been something on your mind for a while. That's why we're so excited to have Barret here. But what was it for you, Mark, that really prompted this interest?
Well, I tend to believe that everybody, like anxiety, right? Everybody has a level of anxiety. I think everybody has a level of imposter syndrome. And I keep saying syndrome because that's how I was raised thinking. So imposter phenomenon. However, do certain people have more than others? And Dr. Joe, you and I have talked many times strategically about where we want this show to go, where the Drug Story Theater, one of the goals, Professor, is that every 6th and 7th grader in the world and their guardians are able to consume and enjoy and understand and embrace Drug Story Theater.
Right.
And we talk about why not? What's holding us back? What is it necessarily that is not allowing us to bring that out, right? And whether it's the smallest things, right? So am I worthy? What is it, and how, what's the antidote? What's the other side of it? Is it humility? Is it the fear of having delusions of grandeur, right? So gosh forbid somebody says you're delusional. You can't possibly get this in front of every 6th and 7th grader. You can't possibly achieve the success that you see. And that's where, for me, it comes back to the home and social domain, Dr. Joe, of the IM, where it really is where I want to dig in and discover further. But is there something more simple than that? Is there something more logical that is out there? Love to hear it.
If you're asking me.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. But then I say, I feel like, when you're talking about achievement, taking next steps, feeling as though, hey, I want this to go big, or I want this to be bigger. I think it has the potential to do this. It's that there's always going to be the gremlin on your shoulder saying, no, dummy, like, no, that you're, what were you thinking about? That's, I think, a common thing that we all have. We have, the angel and the devil on our side, one telling us no, one telling us do it. I think it's really important to be realistic and accurate in what can be done, and then effective planning in terms of getting there. And that just raises confidence. I mean, a lot of the leadership literature talks about, establishing quick wins. So yeah, your ultimate goal is all 6th and 7th graders, but there's some quick wins out there that might be all 6th and 7th graders in Massachusetts. Then it's all in New England. Then it's all in this. And so it's setting the stage for success at increments until all of a sudden it's there, until the momentum. So building momentum and building more of that fervor and interest. And I feel like with imposter phenomena, like it's not so much like I can't take this idea further. It's a personal of I'm not good enough for amongst these people. And so it's a little bit different in terms of than achievement. It's more or less of I don't feel like my abilities and talents are as good as these other people that I'm working with, and I'm a fraud and they're going to figure it out. And what we need to be doing is really encouraging leaders of organizations to be not only cultivating a sense where folks come in, with great onboarding, talking about their achievements and cultivating a culture of acknowledgement rather than a culture of deficiency, which is a majority of organizations, and that's in my humble opinion, is that a lot of times we talk to people about what they could do next, rather than, hey, you're doing this X, Y, and Z really well, and then setting the stage for here's how I want you to achieve. Rather, we're saying you're not doing this for the next step. You're not doing this for the next step. And that can immediately make you feel like, well, then what am I doing? So if we want to start kind of minimizing the impact or the effect of imposter phenomena, it's creating organizations in which people come in, they feel like they fit, they feel like they belong, regardless of the other rock stars in the room. They themselves can see themselves as a part of the organization itself. Whether they feel they're as smart as them or not, they're a part of the organizations and feel like they have a voice and something to add.
Yeah. And
so there's a safety component to that, right?
Oh, so we can talk about, even the fundamental element of psychological safety in terms of being able to speak up in a group. I mean, that's a huge part of belonging. You go into any type of team or even organization, and you don't feel like you can actually say something without retaliation or being called, negative names or things like that. You're definitely not going to feel as smart enough as someone in the group. But if you come in there and feel like you can be your authentic self, that you have good relationships, that you can form relationships with others, and that you actually have a voice in the organization that fits with your values, it's going to feel great. But you can see how that may relate to issues of kind of certain status characteristics like race, ethnicity, gender, where those organizations may not feel like they were made for other individuals. And so folks are coming in with like, how do I share my voice? How do I feel like a part of that? That's what we need to look at.
Yeah. And I really would like to believe that the IM is that, because the IM is saying we're all doing the best we can. Let's look again at who we are, why we do what we do. responding to based on the influence of the domains. And
Yeah.
you take the words look again and reverse them again and look.
Mhm.
Again, to repeat something, look like a spectator. Let's
Mhm.
respect why people do what they do. When's the last time you got angry at someone treating you with respect?
Right, exactly.
Right. And that leads to value. Respect
Mhm.
leads to value, and value leads to the trust, Barret, that
Yeah.
you're saying. The
Yeah.
trust that one needs to be able to share one's ideas without
Mhm.
worrying you're going to be seen as less valuable.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that is sort of an antidote. It's a social antidote to imposter phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other people help you with the antidote.
Exactly. I mean, again, it's if you think about, like, I like to really look at belongingness as a big antidote to imposter phenomenon. And there's so many components of belongingness, but again, one of those biggest parts is the relationships. And so if you feel like you have quality relationships, at least good enough and consistent, then you can see exactly how those go. And when you have quality relationships, there's an element of trust, there's respect, there's generativity to some extent in terms of even others. So there's all those things that you're talking about that kind of fill into that I think would have a positive impact on that sense of imposter phenomenon.
It is about the relationship. It is, and from a psychological psychiatry point of view, there's the brain tool we use for that is theory of mind.
Yeah.
We can't see someone's mind, so we have to guess and theorize what they think or feel.
Yeah.
What we want to know is what are they thinking and feeling about me?
Right.
And that drives us. But it's so interesting because it is about the relationship and feeling valued in the relationship. And I am so proud and honored to feel valued in the relationship that I have with our sponsors. So with that in mind,
I love this.
we will take a commercial break and be right back with Barret Michaelec to talk about imposter phenomenon and get into some humility.
Sure.
We'll be right back.
Hey, welcome back. And again, we're super grateful for you listening to the Dr. Joe Show. If you have anyone that you think might be a good sponsor, shoot us an email at drjoepodcast@gmail.com. DRJOE podcast@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts about the show too. We're wondering, are we talking to the trees or are people really gaining value in this? Please let us know. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of the show.
And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show with Professor Barret Michaelec talking about imposter phenomenon.
Yeah. And it has been an exciting and thought-provocative discussion. And, we usually save the two questions a little later, but I do think we should bring them in now because I think we can really dig deep with it. So, the I am is saying we're all doing the best we can, responding to an influence by the four domains that we've been talking about: your home domain, your social domain, those are outside, and the internal domains of your biological domain and the IC domain. Because the domains interact, a small change in any of the domains can have a big effect. Don't need to change everything. So Barret, given what we're talking about tonight, what small change can you recommend to our listeners?
So to some extent, in terms of imposter phenomena, that's one of those things where that's going to be very contextual. And it's hard to talk about what's a small change you can do besides, believing in yourself and trusting your abilities and kind of going through, or a small thing you could do with that is really make sure you keep a kind of a list of achievements and abilities and notes. I mean, I know a lot of my professor friends like to keep kind of notes from their students that say, thank you so much for all that you did. You really changed my life. So to some extent, it's keeping a record, an actual explicit record of achievements and of like thank you notes and of things that you have done to remind yourself of the journey you've had, and also to remind yourself that it wasn't luck that you're there. It wasn't your charm. You might be charming, but it wasn't your charm. It was more than likely your abilities and your talents that brought you there. But one of the things, and this is kind of where I'd like to shift gears a little bit, if you don't mind, and we didn't get too much into humility and talking about humility, but it does have a lot to do, in the paper, we compare it with imposter phenomena, And the idea of humility in general is really kind of seeing yourself accurately in terms of your abilities and your limitations. It's the idea of you actually have to have a lot of self-confidence to have humility. But it's also knowing that you're one small part of a much larger structure and organization in terms of being a part of a team or even within a universality of it, right? And it's kind of having a low self-focus. So being kind of somewhat other-oriented and kind of losing yourself in the sense of others in a positive way. And so one of the recommendations in terms of small changes that I would have, because I do think having humility actually does limit the impact of imposter phenomena if you experience it. So I would encourage listeners to really practice their humility as a way of maybe staving off imposter phenomena. And one of the, I would say, small changes or practices, because we have my center, the Center for Advancing Interprofessional Practice, Education, and Research, actually has a training in humility. But some of the things that we actually go over, the workouts that we cover, are things that we can do every day. One of them, one of my favorites, absolute favorites, and this can go for a lot of things. This works for empathy, this works for humility, it works for all the things, is this notion of giving others the gift of your attention when you are listening to them. So a lot of times when we engage in conversation with a back and forth, we're already thinking about what we're going to say next before the person has finished, or how we can interject ourselves. So giving the gift of your attention to someone else while they're speaking, kind of listening mindfully, bringing yourself back to the conversation, back to what they're saying, rather than drifting off into your own world. Really, that kind of lowers that self-focus, really pushes the focus on somebody else, and also allows you to understand that you're in a conversation with someone else and you're just a part of it, right? And that you're giving that gift. So that's one small practice. And there's a few others I can go over, but that's one small practice I think that we can all do with our partners, our friends, our colleagues on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, we say exactly the same. You're not talking to someone, you're talking with someone.
Exactly.
You're not talking at them, talk with them.
Mm-hmm.
But it is that just enhancing and increasing somebody else's value. Can you talk a little bit about how people can get some of your work and these things?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a majority of our kind of e-learning courses are built towards health professionals and really practicing those team-based skills. But we have stuff on just the fundamentals of interprofessional education. We have stuff that's geared towards the clinical learning environment. We have stuff that's geared towards primary care. But the one I was referring to is the interprofessional training in empathy, affect, humility, and mindfulness. And it's really about cultivating the muscles related to kind of emotional intelligence, other orientation, communication skills. And again, it's geared towards health professionals, but anyone can use it. There's workouts nested within each of the modules. And those are available on our website, which is, again, if you just Google CAIPER, C-A-I-P-E-R, and ASU, the first thing will come up. But again, it's the Center for Advancing Interprofessional Practice, Education, and Research. And through our website, you'll see all of the offerings that we have there. And we're developing more. We're developing one in structural competency. We're developing one in intellectual humility. And we're actually developing one in belongingness.
Mm. I encourage people to go there. We'll post it on our site, right, Tom? So that we can do that. Tom, how is this relating to you? What are you thinking about this?
Oh, I mean, like Mark said, I think it affects everyone, but being technically in entertainment, you got to be a multi-hyphenate. And so you're always wondering, am I good enough at this or that? So, Barret, I jumped from Bridgewater State University the month after graduating. I was at the Cannes Film Festival. And so I got lucky. This is...
Are you sure?
Are you sure?
Yes. So, I mean, I don't think it's
got to be in place.
I don't think it's a black mark on yourself to admit that you were in the right place at the right time sometimes. Yeah. Like, I'm here because I was in the right place at the right time. Yeah. I made it my own. But
there you go. How did you get to that right place, though? That's a question I always ask people. Like, there's a reason you were at that right place.
Tom, what's the phrase, right?
I worked hard to be this lucky, but there's life is Mario Kart. Sometimes you get a power up.
That's true. And sometimes you get a red shell.
And that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. But as long as you can acknowledge yourself, again, it's keeping So one of the best things about humility is that it kind of acts as a leveling mechanism. It, rather than getting so high on yourself and being like, look at all that I've achieved.
Dunning-Kruger.
Humility allows you to kind of stay at that level and say, wait, yeah, I've done really well, but so have a number of others. And there were a number of factors that came into play that got me there, but I did use my opportunities very well. Right. And so it allows us to kind of see us in a more realistic and accurate kind of picture, where imposter phenomenon, and I don't disagree with you, Mark. I do think we do have a level of imposter phenomenon in us. Like it could be awoken.
Right.
That's why, and that kind of gets to one of your points. You were saying how, you had referred to it as a syndrome. And one of the reasons that the literature is moving away from calling it a syndrome is because there's not it's not in the DSM. It's not a diagnosable criteria. It's a contextual and situational phenomenon that kind of comes and goes, right? And it really depends on a number of elements about it. So, it can be triggered at some point in our lives where we start to realize, or in multiple times. But again, it comes back to, for me as a sociologist, looking at, for others, it seems to happen quite often because our institutions and organizations may not have been built for them effectively. And so now we have to restructure them, look at those pathways, make sure we have a diversification, a lot of voices are being heard. And there's people at the table.
And so that really gets to the second truth of the I am, right?
Mhm.
Because everyone has one. Everyone's interested in what you think or feel about them through their IC domain, which has an effect on their biological domain, because it feels different when you feel respected or disrespected, and you're part of someone's home or social domain. This means the second truth: you control no one, but you influence everyone.
Yeah.
You get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Professor Barret Michaelec, what kind of influence do you want to be?
I love this question. I think if more people thought about this question, they would have a more direct focus of their work. One of the best questions, it's not, this is a fantastic question. It reminded me of a question of something I was told by an associate dean when I was going up for tenure. And they were asking, and I was saying, well, what do I need to actually get to this point? Like, what are the criteria exactly? And how do I present that in a package? And this associate dean, who kind of out of nowhere, and I wasn't expecting this, said, tell us your brand. And I didn't like that initially. I thought that was a very kind of commercialization of the work I was doing, branding myself. No, I don't want to do that. But in reality, the term that he was using was actually exactly what you're saying, is the influence. He meant to say influence. And what kind of influence do you want to have? How does your work have an influence? Tell us how you're influencing kind of the market in that way. And so I take yours in a much broader sense, which hopefully is kind of the way you're thinking about it. And I see my influence as someone who kind of kicks up dust. I like to, like I said, make the familiar strange. I like to influence people in terms of, and organizations, in looking at things that they're taking for granted. I want them to put a different lens on it and say, whoa, wait a second. That's what I like to do. And sometimes that ruffles a little feathers. And I'm sure I've gotten a little bit of a reputation of kind of, like I said, kicking up dust and maybe poking the bear a little bit. But in terms of influence and the influence I want to have, that's what I want to do for the scholarship and what I want to do for the research. I want to raise up these issues and say, wait a second, we need to think about this and the way we're talking about it. And that's kind of influence I like to see.
What are you hoping the outcome will be of that type of influence?
So, and you just asked another amazing question, because that exact question kind of gets to why I started studying humility in the first place. So what type of outcome? Ideally, I will be a world-renowned scholar that gets taken in keynotes, and I go everywhere, right? And I'm spreading the word on imposter phenomenon, humility, and empathy, and emotional contagion. We're talking about these amazing things. In reality, at best, in 20 years, 30 years, I'll be a footnote in some graduate student's dissertation. That's the reality, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. The outcome is, again, at some point, my influence, whether it's in my teaching or the research I'm doing, I might hit a few students, a few scholars, a few people to think about things differently. I may have put a light bulb somewhere. That's perfect for me. That's all I can ask. And I always say that the most influence a sociologist, a professor can ever have is on teaching Sociology 101 and having just one or two people, like just have them think about the things that they do on a regular basis or see and open their eyes just a little bit more to what's actually happening, making that familiar strange. So that's the outcome for me.
That'd be great. And, it would be wonderful if we all really understood how we influence each other and what we want to do. And you're right. We may not be remembered, but we can still have a legacy.
Exactly.
One person
exactly.
Yeah. Michael, Barret, this has just been fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming.
The pleasure's been mine.
Folks, tune in one more time. How can they find your material?
So you can either Google me, which is probably the easiest because my name is pretty unique. So you can find basically everything I do. You can find my research. You can find all the videos I've been on and that kind of stuff. I did a TEDx talk on emotional contagion. You can find that. All those things, if you Google me, you can also Google the Center for Advancing Interprofessional Practice, Education, and Research, or just type in CAIPER space ASU. And that should bring up our center as well.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. My pleasure.
Folks, listen in, and we will see you all next week. Bye, Mark. Bye, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Bye, all.
Just to show that